So welcome to another episode of Structo's Meet the Writers. It's a short format interview series talking to some of the poets and authors who have contributed to the new issue of Structo. Today we're getting to know Georgi Gill a little bit. Hi, Georgi. So you've agreed to kick things off by reading the poem you have in the new issue. So I think, should we just kick off with that?
Sure thing.
Go for it.
Amelioration. She takes a buff-covered A6 Muji notebook, what Kieran Carson would have done, and fills it with well-meaning advice from boring friends. Sit down in good light, buy yourself flowers every week. Browse Heraclitus for stimulation. Read Suter's Diaries of a Dying Man to explore your own presence and absence. Thank stars and cliches. Engage in science and the arts. Are you self-actualizing yet? Bake a cake. She holds the book to the light, transparent and thin, and knows herself, knows she feels better for yawning, better for rest, better still for the company of boring friends.
Thanks very much for that.
I don't know if the camera picked up the DPD delivery van just reversing in our
Well, as I said before we started, in the first of these videos, I had my doorbell go incredibly loudly about halfway through, so it's absolutely fine.
Okay.
When did you write the poem? Do you remember?
Ooh, I write very, yeah. I think I wrote a first draft of it a few years ago, and it sat in a notebook or in a file for quite a long time, and then I came and went with it, and then reshaped it quite a lot, and started writing a newish sequence probably about a year ago now, and thought, oh, actually that poem could find a space with this sequence. So yeah, I write very slowly.
Well, we publish very slowly, so we're a good match. So, so you have an interesting background. I based I have some questions jotted down based on the bio that's in the issue. As I mentioned before we started, this could be a very long chat, which I'm going to try really hard to keep short. There's some things in the poem about science and the arts, and that seems to be something that links together a lot of your background in terms of your day job and your interests. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, a lot of my writing was certainly in the past year or so, and my day job, I'm a PhD researcher, so if people don't know what my day job is, and why should they, so I'm researching lived experience of MS and how that can be communicated through writing poetry, and so a lot of my poems are, poems over the past year, not necessarily all the work I've done previously, but the recent stuff has been about my lived experience of MS, and that's also what I'm working with. In fact, as part of my research next week, which date are we at? Yes, next week, I start a series of workshops with participants for my research, and we're all going to be writing poems together about our MS experiences. So yeah, it kind of, it's all lots of little tendrils that all feed into one another.
And in terms of a beginning for that interest, is that something that came through early, or is that something that developed as you began writing? How did those two cultures come together in your mind?
The research topic and
the kind of the creative writing aspect, and almost the research or the science or the medicine side of things. Have they always been interlinked?
Entirely through Yeah, I think so. I've always, yeah, been, we write a lot to reflect what our lives are, don't we? Even if we sometimes do that more obliquely. And when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis 17 years ago, and I wrote a lot at the time, and you know, that's what I did. Didn't write about it at all. Would write about absolutely anything else. But then you discover that it's subtly creeping in other ways into the writing. And after finishing on something else completely, I thought I need a new project. And thought actually maybe it's time that I did explore what it's like to have MS. And having finished my master's in poetry, thought I want to go back to the sciences. One of my bachelors was in science. So I, yeah, looked at how I could really mesh the two together academically and find a way to explore my own writing, but also how can that influence other people's communication about MS if they don't perceive themselves as poets already or don't write poetry already. What can we do with that to change it?
That's really interesting. I'm always very, I have a science background as well. It's always really nice to see it because these things often are so intertwined and they can inform each other. And yeah, there's an enormous amount of creativity in both of those often apparently diverse worlds. Yeah. That it's really nice when you see it brought together in such a concrete way, as in perhaps in your work. Yeah, it's very satisfying, I guess. So.
I think so, yeah. And just it's keeping the human. One of the other things I do, and I know that I'm not going to delve off into lots of things that I do, but I've been lucky enough to be poet in residence at the Anatomical Museum in Edinburgh, and that's just amazing because we can really bring the human into human anatomy. So it's reminding us that science doesn't sit over there in a neat box. It's here. We are science. And how do our minds and our brains interact? And that's a very simplistic division of me to say. It doesn't even really exist, the mind and the brain. But somehow we live as though they are separate. So it's nice to, through poetry or through other writing, kind of explore how we mesh together. I don't know that I've said that very well.
Well, it's good because I was going to ask you about that work actually, so that's great. So what does your residency involve?
Well, for the first few months, it involved sitting in this amazing museum, getting to just talk to the curator and the staff there who are amazing, and look at lots of things in jars, and lots of body parts, lots of bodies, lots of skeletons, some of which come with amazing history, and quite, oh, this is, I can't believe, I've just thought of the cheesiest image, and I'm going to say it anyway, fully fleshed histories. People like I apologise before I read that. The Edinburgh famous murderer, there was Burke and Hare, who murdered people in order to provide anatomists with bodies. And so there's a skeleton there. So you can actually, and there's a skeleton of somebody called the Crammond Murderer. So if you know Edinburgh at all, Crammond in Edinburgh had its own famous murderer whose skeleton is now in the museum. So some of their exhibits in the collection have very definite and well mapped out history, but others, they'll just be a brain in a jar, or a damaged heart, or a perfectly good working heart. And it's sort of trying to map stories or just visceral experiences. So initially I was doing that in the museum, and then lockdown. So I morphed into virtual poet in residence. So previously I'd been doing things like creative writing workshops with members of the public. We haven't done that virtually because there are a lot of limitations about what you can show with human remains on camera. But I made a film. So I made a short poetry film by creating my own homemade anatomical museum, which is less gory than it sounds. I've actually got this here just on the windowsill off camera. There's lots of coloured in, because when I did my BSc, anatomy was one of the things that I studied as part of that. So I've got lots of coloured in anatomical colouring books, and colouring them and cutting them out to make my own museum. So yeah, that's how the residency's changed.
Wow, that sounds really fascinating. It's also really nice to hear how these things change with present circumstances. Is the video it's online somewhere, or can we link it below this somewhere?
Very possibly.
Okay, we can talk about that.
Yeah, we can talk about that, but I think probably, possibly, I will find out for you.
Thank you. So finally, in an effort to keep this short, can you tell me a little bit, you're as well as a writer and researcher, you're also editor of the Interpreter's House journal. Anything you'd like to plug for that?
Ooh, at the moment, as an editorial team, we are deep in reading submissions.
Okay, so I'll leave you alone, yeah.
But we will have, where are we at? We're coming up to August. So yeah. The next issue will be out in October, and people will be submitters will be hearing from us within around the next 2 weeks. We've had a huge sort of it's that tsunami of contributions during lockdown. I don't know whether some people were finding themselves with a lot more time or feeling particularly inspired, but there are currently 4 of us, 2 of us wading through the poetry, 2 of us swimming through the fiction, and there's a lot of great stuff there. So I'm excited to go to the editorial meetings, and we will sit and we will stake our corners for our poems that we've chosen. Oh,
great. So you're at that stage where it's all about, yeah, trying to winnow down to make an issue. How many pieces generally end up in an issue now that it's online?
It's online. It fluctuates a little bit.
Okay.
So I'd say that quite often we go for around somewhere 24, 25.
That's nice.
Depends. It can sort of be the
table of contents.
Yeah, you can pretty much see it all in one go. So it's a mix of poetry and fiction, so we fit in as much as we can.
Great. Well, I'll put links to that below. But thanks so much for taking the time. It's interesting to get an insight into people who, we just have a single poem from you in this issue, but it's incredibly interesting just to hear what everyone's up to. So thanks for agreeing to take part.
Thank you for having me.